Chapter 21, Lesson 2, Environmental Policies in the United States. Essential question: how does the United States protect the environment? Objectives: describe two major developments in U.S. environmental history, give examples of three federal agencies that have environmental responsibilities, explain the purpose of environmental impact statements, give an example of how citizens can affect environmental policy at each level of government, local, state, and national, evaluate the media as source of information about the environment. History in the U.S. Environmental policy. The United States has reduced many types of pollution and improved water quality in many places. It is still struggling to use its resources in a sustainable way, preserve its unique ecosystems, and reduce its impact on global environment. During the 1800s, people turned prairies into croplands, cut down ancient forests to construct buildings, and hunt many animal species to extinction. President Theodore Roosevelt and conservationist John Muir were early conservation leaders who fought for increased protection and management of the nation's resources. Many national forests and parks and agencies to manage them were established around the 1900s. Environmental agencies and laws. Throughout the 1900s, U.S. citizens became more aware of environmental problems. Widespread crop disasters in the 1930s showed the country that poor farming practices were causing soil erosion and poverty, the Dust Bowl. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, enforces the Clean Air and Clean Water Act. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service enforces the Endangered Species Act. Environmental impact statements are proposals for the constructions of dams, highways, airports, and other projects that the federal government controls or funds, and it must be evaluated with an environmental impact statement or EIS. So the topics that they address in an environmental impact statement are air quality, noise, water resources and water quality, infrastructure and land use, solid and hazardous waste management, visual effects, floodlands and wetlands, ecological resources, historic, archaeological, cultural resources, safety and health, community impacts and environmental justice, and socioeconomic impacts. It states the need for the project, and it tells us the project's impact on the environment. Talks about how negative impacts can be minimalized. Unfunded mandates and economic impacts. Some limits have been placed on the federal government's power to pass environmental laws. Congress passed a law to prevent unfunded mandates, which are federal regulations that do not provide funds for state or local governments to implement the regulations. The federal government must now provide funding for any new laws that will cost more than $50 million to implement. So what they're saying is if the federal government implements a law, they're going to have to pay the states and local governments the funds that they need to implement that. Influencing environmental policy. For local governments, they make decisions for their communities. They hold public meetings. They decide how land may be used and developed and where businesses and housing may be located. Have you ever noticed that most of the time houses are not right near grocery stores? Because the land is developed for different things, for businesses, for industrial areas, for housing complexes. They create plans for public facilities, for waste disposal and recycling, and other facets of local life. A problem with local environmental planning is that communities often do not coordinate their plans. So Cape Coral might have some plans, and Fort Myers might have plans, but those plans do not coordinate between the two cities. How can you influence environmental policy? You can contact your elected representatives and tell them your opinions on issues. It is easier for you to influence policy at local level than at national. And the major way that you can influence environmental policies is by voting. You guys are all going to be coming of the voting age in the next couple of years. You guys are going to be the generation that is going to fix all the environmental issues that the older people have produced. So voting is very important. Every vote counts. Laws and information. Federal government passes laws that set minimal environmental standards, but each state may create laws that set higher standards. California vehicle emissions is an example. So in California, the vehicle emissions are more stringent. If you buy a car in California, it costs more because they have different things on their car to help improve how much pollution it puts out. If you have a car in Florida and you decide to move to California, when you go to register your car, it's going to cost you more because the cars in Florida do not have the same standards that the cars in California do. Lawmakers are heavily influenced by lobbying, and lobbying is organized attempts to influence the decisions of lawmakers to vote a certain way. Different businesses will have somebody that actually goes to Washington, D.C. and lobbies for their business and tries to get the lawmakers to vote the way that businesses want. So have, more pollution or less strict regulations. Electronic media is the main source of information. So websites, blogs, TVs, and radios. Media reports are usually brief and they may leave out a lot of information. So most people do not go and read newspapers, magazines, things like that. They're getting all their information off of a website, listen to it on the blog, TV, or radio. You should find sources other than public media. So when you're researching information, don't just go by one TV source. You might want to look up an article somewhere in a newspaper or something like that. Evaluate for bias and accuracy. Some news programs are very biased against a certain standpoint. So are some periodicals like newspapers or magazines. They're only going to give one side of the information. You need to hear both sides of the story before you make a decision.